For me, it's a pleasure to be here in this important topic and session. I think that mental health and well-being is becoming really a pressing concern for all of us. And we might thinking that in deep, because it will be really the upcoming years, all the students and also the teachers. So I'm going to make a brief presentation. Please, if you could put number 1 over there, el número 1. Voy a empezar por definir el well-being, que es el bienestar. El bienestar es una definición difícil. Hay muchas organizaciones que lo han tomado diferentemente y muchas definiciones en la literatura. Y en principio se ha definido como sentirse bien o cómodo, sentirse sano, socialmente contactado, feliz, empático y con un sentido de significado y de propósito en la vida. Esto es well-being para tener un marco. La salud mental tiene una definición semejante, pero hace parte del bienestar. No es el bienestar metido en salud mental, sino salud mental dentro del bienestar. La salud mental es un estado de bienestar de una persona en que puede utilizar todas sus capacidades, puede hacer frente a las tensiones normales que trae la vida, los estreses de la vida, puede aprender, puede trabajar bien, puede contribuir a la comunidad y a su familia. El rojo, el de aprender, y el rojo de familia es mío, porque decidí incluirlo en la definición, dado que estamos en una universidad jesuita. La salud mental es un continuo, o lo mental es un continuo, no es algo como salud mental. Muchas personas llaman salud mental a lo que es enfermedad mental, pero realmente son diferentes. Esto es un continuum que empieza desde la salud y va hasta la enfermedad pasando por los problemas. Se calcula que alrededor del mundo los mental disorders o problemas mentales son de alrededor del 10 a 15%. En diferentes mediciones alrededor del mundo consideran que 10 a 15% de las personas a lo largo de toda la vida pueden tener una enfermedad mental. Los problemas, que son dificultades, estar un poco triste, un poco ansioso, pueden ser alrededor del 15%. O sea, si sumamos ambos, estamos hablando de 1/3 de la comunidad educativa que pueden tener problemas o trastornos. Y la salud mental está en el extremo. Desde la epidemia de COVID hizo aparición en el año 2020, 21, 22, toda la importancia de la salud mental y lo que hay. Y se llama la cuarta ola, la flecha que está en azul, la cuarta ola, ven es la curva subiendo, es la que estamos viviendo hoy en día. A través de los años dejamos ya de ver los pacientes que teníamos en cuidado intensivo, etcétera, y pasamos a tener los problemas mentales que hoy en día digamos, emergieron muy rápidamente en toda la comunidad educativa y son un problema en todo el mundo. La salud mental se mide por la carga de enfermedad. La carga de enfermedad es una medición muy especial que se llaman los DALYs. Los DALYs se componen de 2 componentes. Uno es la discapacidad que produce per se el motivo, el trastorno mental que produce una discapacidad. Yo estoy deprimido y no puedo trabajar tan bien, estoy muy ansioso y no puedo estar en grupos de relación. Eso provee una discapacidad. Y la muerte prematura es el segundo componente. Yo tengo 20 años, decido suicidarme, dejo de vivir 60 años y eso me da un burden, una carga que se suman ambos, y en esta gráfica está en todos los sitios donde ustedes vienen más o menos cuánto se ha calculado de carga de enfermedad de la salud mental, empezando por 8% lo amarillo y terminando a más del 25% lo rojo. Los diferentes países tienen diferente tipo de carga de enfermedad. En Colombia, por ejemplo, que lo tenemos en anaranjado, éramos rojo y cuando se firmó el Tratado de Paz disminuyó a anaranjado. El conflicto armado llevaba mucho a problemas mentales que hoy en día están empezando a aflorar. La medición del burden, de la carga de enfermedad, está en esta diapositiva. Y ustedes ven que todas las enfermedades del mundo que producen un 100% de carga, más o menos el 23% es carga debido a problemas mentales. O sea, 1 de cada 4 DALIs o 1 de cada 5 son enfermedad mental o problemas mentales. Y esto es bien importante, se considera allí no solo lo mental, sino los problemas derivados del alcohol y los problemas derivados del consumo de sustancias psicoactivas. Si ven esta gráfica, que es bien importante, son los problemas y en qué momento emergen. Al lado izquierdo de ustedes están los hombres y las mujeres al lado derecho y están las diferentes enfermedades. En el eje de las Y están las edades. Y ustedes ven la flecha azul que puse en grande, ahí está entre los 16 años que ingresan habitualmente a la universidad, por lo menos en Colombia, hasta los 30 años que vienen, es donde se ve la mayoría de problemas empiezan a emerger. ¿Y cuáles emergen? La depresión, la ansiedad, las fobias, trastornos de alimentación, trastorno bipolar, trastornos de atención, etcétera, que componen toda la carga. Y algo muy importante que no está en esta gráfica es que el 75% de los problemas mentales emergen antes de los 25 años, o sea, en edad universitaria, es que se empiezan a ver. No obstante, no solo ahí, en los colegios, nosotros también tenemos colegios, la comunidad jesuita, se empiezan a ver ya los inconvenientes. Y estos estudios que hemos hecho, algunos acá en Colombia y otros en el mundo, muestran que en una clase de alrededor de 30 a 40 alumnos, hay en general de 6 a 9 estudiantes con alguna dificultad en lo mental. No estoy hablando de trastornos probablemente hay 3, pero hay 6 chicos con algún problema. Y esto se reproduce en la universidad. Es decir, el porcentaje, que es alrededor del 20 o 30%, se reproduce en nuestras universidades. Y esto es verdad a todo lo largo y ancho del mundo. Y hay países donde hay un poco más, como vimos, y otros menos. ¿Qué barreras hay para la atención y la promoción en salud mental? Yo he conversado bastante de esto. La universidad tiene, digamos, el deber de hacer promoción por el bienestar y de hacer prevención para que no haya, pero no el tratamiento. El tratamiento es del sector salud, por lo menos en Colombia y yo creo que alrededor del mundo, y debemos contemplar eso. Nosotros tenemos que hacer promoción y prevención. ¿Qué barreras hay? Entonces miremos el grupito de arriba, perdón, siguiente. Uy, no habían pasado, perdón. Perdón, ahí están las gráficas, siguiente. Siguiente y siguiente. Esto. Las barreras que hay en salud mental son diversas. Hay unas que dependen del individuo, la parte roja del muchacho que está señalado, el estigma que hay por la salud mental, que es muy frecuente, ha bajado a raíz de la epidemia de COVID. Segundo, la epidemia de soledad que hay alrededor del mundo, la epidemia de soledad. Vivimos muy solos y cada vez más solos, y cada vez con más dificultades de interacción. Y alrededor de eso, la dificultad de relaciones interpersonales. Segundo, en donde está el grupo de personas, las barreras que hay en la cultura para la atención en salud mental. Y a la vez, las expectativas que hay en la cultura y en la familia alrededor del estudio. Muchas veces sabemos claramente que hay principios activos de ser muy rico, muchas cosas, trabajar en la bolsa, etcétera, etcétera, y a veces no es el sentido de la vida, pero ellos lo tienen y son expectativas que molestan mucho la salud mental. En la parte de abajo, los profesionales y profesores. Hay una falta de entrenamiento en lo que es salud mental. La mayoría de profesores no conocen de esto. Por eso hemos implantado en los colegios hacer orientación en salud mental escolar. que esto baja el burden, el burnout que tienen los profesores. Se calcula que en profesores de colegios hay un 30% de burnout en todos los profesores, y a nivel universitario esto no es diferente, y en ciertas carreras como medicina oscila entre el 35% y el 60% de burnout por todos los problemas que hay. Ellos requieren aprender también metodologías porque en el día a día van a tener que ver con estudiantes, y hay mucho miedo también a lo mental. La gente le tiene mucho miedo al estudiante que dice, oiga, yo deseo morirme, quiero matarme, ¿qué hago yo con eso? Todo eso da inconvenientes. Y en la parte de abajo, finalmente, los estudiantes no tienen suficiente reconocimiento de la enfermedad mental. A veces no tienen palabras para significar ansiedad o significar depresión, y pueden ir al médico diciendo, yo siento algo que me sube y me baja. Seguramente es ansiedad, pero él no sabe y no lo reconoce. 2, tiene mucha incertidumbre, como ya oímos en la otra conferencia. La incertidumbre es muy grande sobre el futuro. Hay países con mayor incertidumbre y esto aqueja al estudiante. Hay falta de confianza, no hay confianza en la gente, en los profesores, en los directivos, hay desconfianza, se parte de ahí. Y la utilización de medios sociales. En un estudio que acabamos de terminar en Argentina, Perú y en Colombia, vimos que los medios, el celular y el uso repetitivo de TikTok, de todas estas cosas que usan hoy en día los jóvenes por espacios de 4 a 5 horas, es perjudicial para la salud, lleva a disminuir las competencias sociales que pueden tener, y también pierden la oportunidad de conocerse más entre ellos, de estar más entre ellos. Es decir, eso es algo que debemos empezar a pensar. Con esto los invito a nuestra universidad. Arriba 2 fotos de la Javeriana Bogotá y de Javeriana Cali, que tiene un campus también espectacular como el de acá, y mucho de lo que nos hablaba nuestro rector, el padre Múnera, sobre el Amazonas, las playas, los sitios que hay hermosos en Colombia, que ojalá lo conozcan. Vamos entonces a continuar con el panel, y voy a invitar a nuestros estimados compañeros panelistas. Por favor, les voy a pedir que accedan. La doctora Anna Moreland, por favor. La doctora Regina Echanova, quien viene del Ateneo de Manila, de la universidad. Nita Pereira, quien viene de St. Joseph University en Bangalore, India. Por favor, los invito a sentarse. Y igualmente quiero reconocer a Robert, toda la guía que nos dio a través de estos meses para preparar el simposio. Entonces, vamos a cambiar, por favor, a la exposición número 2, ¿ok? Y quiero presentar a Anna Moreland, quien es la Anne Queen Welsh Endowed Chair y directora del programa de honores de la Universidad de Villanova. Bienvenida, doctora Moreland, a Colombia o a Latinoamérica de nuevo. El podio es tuyo.
Gracias. Good afternoon. So forgive me, I will say a few words in Spanish of gratitude, but the rest of the presentation will be in English. Primero quería empezar agradeciéndole a Carlos y a todos los de la Universidad Javeriana por habernos invitado y recibido con tanta generosidad. La misa anoche fue un privilegio. El coro, un coro de ángeles. Estoy muy agradecida de estar acá. Para mí es un placer especial estar en Latinoamérica en una reunión de jesuitas. Me mudé a los Estados Unidos de chica, pero mis padres, como buenos argentinos, nos criaron con el orgullo de ser latinoamericanos. Y a los jesuitas les debo todo lo que soy, como teóloga, como profesora, como mujer. No tengo palabras suficientes para agradecerles todo lo que me brindaron en Boston College. Final word of gratitude in English to my co-panelists, Nita and Regina. I have behind me not just co-panelists, but new friends. We met several times over Zoom, and I'll be leaving Columbia with two dear friends, and I'm really grateful and honored to be up here with both of them. It worked. Okay, so I was at the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities last January, and a president of a small Catholic college said with tears in her eyes, "The barn is on fire and nobody is listening." She was talking about Catholic higher education in the United States, and she is for sure right. But there's a deeper barn on fire in our students' hearts, and not enough people are listening. We just heard startling statistics on the global level and in Columbia that Carlos introduced us to. In my own university context, I hear over and over from my students, "I don't remember a time when I didn't feel stressed." These are 18 to 22-year-olds. I don't remember a time when I didn't feel stressed. I think Jesuit universities are uniquely poised to address these challenges. At its root, the mental health crisis is a crisis of being human. And Jesuit universities have a very deep, a very expansive understanding of what it means to be human. And that anthropology grounds a distinctive student formation. But I find that sometimes Jesuit universities are a little shy about drawing upon that rich vocabulary and settle instead for corporate and marketing language. Now, I'm going to be talking about, I wrote a book with a co-author this past year called The Young Adult Playbook, Living Like It Matters. Spanish translation comes out in the fall. I'm going to be talking about themes from that book because I was shaped by the Jesuits. There are Ignatian themes that run throughout. I'll talk about 3 challenges that young people, our college students, face and pair each challenge with an Ignatian strategy to meet that challenge. The 3 challenges are choice paralysis. I'm going to pair that with the Ignatian discernment practice. Lack of leisure, I will pair with cura personalis. And the epidemic of loneliness, I will pair with the Ignatian practice of detachment. And a lot of what I'll say this afternoon are themes that we've already been hitting since the conference began. So it's going to sound familiar. So first, choice paralysis. Clinical psychologist Meg Jay has this great image. She says that young people are like elite swimmers stuck in the middle of the ocean. These swimmers have great muscles, their technical skills are off the charts, they're really good at swimming, but they're stuck treading water in the middle of the ocean because they don't know whether they want to swim to Panama or to Colombia. They don't know what their direction is. They don't know where they want to go. Our college students either commit too early to a career in which they know they'll be miserable, but they want to avoid the anxiety of choosing. Or they meander through their college experience, having no idea how their classes are going to translate into a satisfying professional life. Now, Ignatian discernment, the centerpiece of a Jesuit education, can help students decide where they want to swim, where they want to go. I'm just going to talk about 2 aspects of Ignatian discernment. First is the role of the imagination. Now, as we know, our students are receiving concrete images over TikTok and Instagram every minute. I was going to say on the hourly, but that's just not fast enough. We need to introduce them to real helpful, concrete models of the Ignatian and Catholic tradition that are much more compelling than the surface models they meet over social media. Quick story. When I was in the fog of early motherhood, my husband and I went to listen to Marilyn Robinson, an author that we really admired, in Washington, D.C. at the Folger Shakespeare Library. And that night, I saw an image of this woman who was poised and articulate and insightful and countercultural and comfortable in her own skin. And I thought to myself, I want to be like her. We need to offer our students these concrete models from our traditions, and we have them. They're better than what's on offer on TikTok. I'm going to say more about these models in a second, but this is the rehabilitating of the imagination of Ignatian discernment. Second, Ignatian discernment helps us move away from a mathematical model of decision-making and toward a quantitative model of decision-making. My students love the pro-con list. They just love it. They list out the pros and the cons on either side of a decision, count it up, and go with a mathematical decision. Ignatian discernment trains us to slow down and to recognize that there are a set of goods at stake on either side of a decision, and that those goods are embedded in lives well lived. It's a much richer and slower process of discernment. Another quick story. When I was 29, I was offered my first job at Loyola Baltimore, a Jesuit university. It was my dream job. Everything about it I loved. My new husband at the time, he's my same husband, but it was new at the time. Whoops. My husband at the time was offered a job in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that, if you know anything about the geography in the US, is not next to Baltimore, Maryland. Because I had gone on Ignatian silent retreats every year while I was at Boston College, because I was trained in the process of Ignatian discernment, I was able to slow down and have the courage to not take that job, because it so happened that I was 29 and my husband and I also wanted to start a family, and that's really hard to do when you're living on two coasts. So Ignatian discernment it honors the fact that when we make one choice, we're walking away from a set of goods. There's a tragedy in walking away from that set of goods that we've said no to. So I've just talked about choice paralysis. Remember the student stuck in the ocean? And I've paired it with at least two small aspects with a large tradition of Ignatian discernment. I love doing that, by the way. Second is cura personalis. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about lack of leisure and how this Ignatian strategy of cura personalis meets this challenge. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, a long time ago, I decided to invite the dorm into the classroom, and that changed the way that I taught. So the student concerns, the student questions, the student issues became the center of what I was teaching, and then I brought in resources to talk about those concerns. It has been a mostly terrifying experience because I've learned a lot about what happens in the dorms and what happens in my student lives, but it's also totally transformed my teaching. One of my students said to me recently, "Everywhere I turn, adults are trying to get me addicted. Whether it's porn or weed or online sports gambling or social media or Netflix, everywhere I turn, adults are trying to get me addicted." When he tries to rest from his studies, from his part-time job, from the extracurricular activities he's involved in, what's there at the ready? These addictive technologies. Cura personalis is the key to Jesuit education. The aspect of cura personalis that I'm going to talk about is that space of what are our students doing when they're not studying, when they're not working, and when they're not involved in their extracurricular activities. Now, I mention the word leisure to my students, and they don't know how to spell it, much less practice it. But I use an image of a garden, a leisure garden. In this garden, it is, of course, important to weed and to prune TikTok and Instagram. Deleting it, really important. Building a fence around the super predator that is the iPhone, crucial to a healthy garden. But that's just step one. Step two is planting, nurturing, and sustaining actually healthy plants. And here, the imagination comes into play again. Why? Because our students used to have healthy leisure practices. As children, they used to play pickup basketball or do puzzles or paint. Friends can help each other rehabilitate these long neglected and lost leisure practices in this healthy garden. But there's more. This leisure garden, at its root, is interior, and this is something that the Ignatian tradition teaches us. It takes a real centeredness to be able to place guardrails around work. Think of how tempted you've been all day to open up that iPhone. I'm not guilting you. I've been tempted as well. But we need to try to let leisure breathe into our lives. Rabbi Abraham Heschel tells us that the Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays. The weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It is not an interlude, but the climax of living. Now, this is the exact opposite way that we think of the Sabbath. Sabbath is leftover. What structures our work week is work. Here, and this is Heschel again, the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to subdue, but to be in accord. My students, though, they wake up on Sunday mornings really stressed with the work that's bearing down on them in the week ahead. So I recommend a Saturday practice, Saturday Sabbath practice, and then to set up daily mini Sabbath practices so that the Sabbath becomes part of the way that we structure our week. These are small changes that have an outsized impact on our students' lives. At least that's what they tell me. So I've just talked about lack of leisure and paired that with cura personalis. Finally, I'll turn to the epidemic of loneliness. I'm pairing that with the practice of detachment, in particular the detachment of fear of failure, and fear of rejection. The loneliness on college campuses is astonishing, it's jaw-dropping. Students are not hooking up, they are hooked on porn. The few relationships that are on offer on college campuses are quasi-marital, they're all absorbing, and nobody wants one of those. I think this is the area of deepest disarray on college campuses. The biggest fear students have about whenever I bring up this scary word called dating, the biggest fear is the fear of rejection. The same fear of rejection that plagues them in the professional realm from taking risks plagues them in the personal realm. It's a fear of failure, of being rejected, but they need to learn to detach themselves from this fear and to learn to build the courage to seek and cultivate new friendships, real friendships, and romantic relationships. So remember when I said that I invited the dorm into the classroom? I can't believe I do this, but I give dating workshops. I did not think when I was in graduate school that I was going to be giving dating workshops, but you meet the students where they are. Anyway, I was giving a dating workshop some years ago, and a student at the end raised his hand and said, I could use this plan to make a friend. And I thought to myself, I thought I was talking about dating. And the scales fell from my eyes because friendship has become an endangered species on college campuses, at least in the US. We need to help our students build friendships and romantic relationships. I am sometimes shocked by how basic the driving manual needs to be. I have stories, but I don't have time. Students, though, need help from adults because their friends are driving as blind as they are. Human nature is intrinsically erotic. Because we are built in the image of a Trinitarian God, we are built for relationship. Because we are bodily, Eros is wrapped up in everything that we do. We need to help our students ask more from Eros, not less. Is this difficult? Of course it is. But what's going on college campuses in the US is not working. So I've just paired Epidemic of Loneliness with the Ignatian practice of detachment, and in particular, the detachment from the fear of failure and the fear of rejection. So I'll conclude with a story, my third and last story. Some years ago, I gave a talk at a cloistered Benedictine women's religious community in the US, where they pray, they sing Gregorian chants 7 times a day. These were holy women. And I gave them a talk, much like the talk I just gave, trying to shock them, to let them know about college students, the addiction, the mental health issues, the loneliness issues. At the end of the talk, Mother Abbess says, "Anna, everything that you have just said about your students is true in this community, everything. So if we want to evangelize our students, we have to look within first and look within ourselves and in our community." That was a transformative moment for me. I thought that I was going to shock these beautiful nuns, and they in turn shocked me. And what's the lesson there? It's really tempting when working with easily enchanted 18 to 22-year-olds to think that we are helping them solve their problems. But if we don't start by implementing these strategies for ourselves, individually, faculty and staff, everyone at the university, if we don't start within, then we will have no success. And remember the power of the concrete model. If we become those concrete models for our students, they will for sure notice and follow suit. We hope. They do. So at Boston College, I learned that falling in love with Christ should transform every aspect of my life. The friendships that I cultivated, what I studied, the kind of work that I sought. There was no aspect of my life left untouched by Christ. And that changed the way that I saw the world. The ultimate aim of an Ignatian education is the person of Christ. Without that center, Ignatian vocabulary becomes a mere marketing tool. But when the vocabulary, the intellectual and spiritual tradition, the pattern and practices of the order become the animating spirit of an Ignatian education, Jesuit universities have something invaluable to offer the world. At the very least, they offer us a deeper understanding of the mental health crisis, showing us that at its root, it's a crisis of being human. And they offer us invaluable tools to help meet that crisis. Thank you. I forgot.
La número 3, por favor. Bueno, voy a presentarles a la profesora Regina Chanova. She is a full professor and licensed psychologist and the chief of the party of the USAID Renew Health Project. Gina was formerly the chair of the Department of Psychology of Ateneo de Manila University. Welcome, Regina.
Buenos dias. Lo siento, that's all I will attempt to speak in Spanish, and I will deliver my talk in English. Next slide, please. So I thought I would share with you how we have tried to address the issue of mental health in the university. I am a faculty of psychology and a practicing psychologist, and I've been with our university for 20 years, and I've seen how the issue of mental health has grown, and the issues that our students today are facing are quite different from what it was 2 decades ago. Just a little bit of context. The latest national survey in our country reports that about 14% of Filipinos have experienced mental health problems at least once in their lifetime. This is slightly higher than global statistics, which is 13%. According to our data, the most common, as Dr. Carlos had also reported, is quite similar, is anxiety, followed by alcohol use, depression. Most alarming is the rise in suicide ideation, both in high school and in college campuses. And how will we explain why our youth are at risk? One is because our youth, because their brains are still developing, their cognitive abilities to cope with their problems may not be quite there yet. And so they may choose poor or maladaptive ways of coping. One of the things that was really interesting for us, we did a survey, especially during the COVID pandemic, and there was a clear pattern where the young were the most depressed, were the most anxious. And when we took a look at how they cope, they were also the least likely to use spiritual coping. And in our study, it was spiritual coping that was the most protective in terms of well-being. Those who used it had better well-being, were less anxious, were less depressed. Now, the problem is, in my country and maybe in some of the other countries here as well, we have a severe lack of mental health professionals. In my country, the ratio of licensed psychologists is 1:50,000. The ratio of psychiatrists to Filipinos is 1:150,000. So how do you address the issue of mental health? Next slide. In our university, our Office of Guidance and Counseling uses 3 tiers of services. At the primary level, we focus on prevention and development programs. This is for everyone, so universal, it's a universal intervention. At the secondary level are interventions that are for what we call at risk. So they are students who are anxious, who are depressed, but maybe not clinically so, and may not need to see a mental health specialist. And finally, at the tertiary level, are those who are perhaps clinically ill and do need specialized care. Next slide. Now, I'd like to share one of our core interventions, which is a class that everyone takes. It's called Understanding the Self. And I remember, this is fairly new, and I remember when it was first pitched, there were many critics. And their question was, what? You really need a course to understand yourself? And our answer is, maybe not. But at this age, we do find that after this course, which is given to freshmen, there is greater insight on who they are, right? And then the second question that our critics say is, really? You can understand yourself after 1 semester? And our answer, of course, is, of course not. But at least you are given some tools, like discernment, as Anna was saying, or the tools like talking to people or coping, so that you can continue to learn how to understand yourself. And this course is multidisciplinary, so it marries concepts in psychology, in sociology, even some political science there. And we talk about the paradoxes of the self and the many selves that we have. And at this age, students are grappling with finding who they are. And there's a lot of crisis and dilemmas in terms of who I am vis-a-vis the many roles that they play. We talk about the self, the body, the mind, and the affect, and how these are interrelated. And so when we talk about, earlier we talked about the whole person, you cannot separate one without the other. And we need to look at the person as and in their entirety. We talk about the self as developing and participating. Here we talk about how it's important for them to know that they are in development and humans will continue to develop, so they should not be beating themselves up at this age in their lives if they're not quite meeting their own expectations. We talk about their relationship with others, their relationships with society. And this is a course that also begins their exposure to underserved communities, so that there's a better understanding that because our students tend to be privileged, that their world is not the world as it is. And finally, we talk about how their life is a narrative and that what they are going through is just the beginning of that. This is a course that is universal, and as we are going along, we are finding that there are actually mental health benefits to the course. It was not meant to be a mental health intervention, but we were finding out that students did report better mental health and well-being because of this. Next slide, please. Beyond the course, our Office of Guidance and Counseling have some amazing prevention programs. They have what they call Blue Snooze. So, there's a room with bean bags. You can just sleep because students often lack sleep. There's speed friending. Anna talked about how there's a need to develop friends. So there are now mechanisms for them to get to know other people on campus. There's art. There's narrative therapy. One of my favorites is a program called Pause and Recharge. We have dogs. Our guidance and office have therapy dogs every day. And students who are stressed, they can come in and just play with the dogs until the dogs get stressed. No, just kidding. And we have coffee stations and stuff like that. So the point is to find out what the students will benefit from, and sometimes it's just the way of the counselors to reach the students first. Other than that, there are secondary services like the prevention activities are really a way to invite them to come and see a counselor or to come and get testing. If they feel that they are anxious, we say, come, let's get you screened. Maybe we find out that you need the programs that we already have. Maybe we'll need to refer you to somebody else, a mental health professional. I also want to talk about this program that it actually began as a post-disaster program or a disaster program, but it evolved eventually. It's called Katatagan. It's a resilience program. Katatagan means resilience in Filipino. And our basic premise is that resilience is not something innate. It is something we develop. But it's not something that we develop naturally. Sometimes we need to help people develop resilience skills. It's 8 sessions, but students can pick and choose which sessions are most meaningful to them. And in each session, which is about an hour and a half, we talk about a particular resilience skill. So we might begin with what are your strengths, who are your strengths. Then we talk about how do you know when you're stressed? What are the signs of your body that you're stressed, and what can you do? We talk about the stress tolerance, and this module emerged because we were hearing a lot of self-harm among our students, cutting, some suicide ideation. And so we wanted students to learn other techniques. So here we would teach them, if you feel emotionally distressed, what can you do? You know, grab an ice cube or something like that. So you will sort of create another sensation, and you will pay attention to that sensation. We talk about healthy distractions. When do you know? When your social media use is already harmful, when you're already what they call now doom scrolling, or your social media has become an addiction already. We also talk about how do you manage negative thoughts when you feel that everything is hopeful and it's your mind that tells you that there's nothing that is to be hopeful about. Is there a way to reframe your thoughts? We talk about problem solving. We talk about how do you actually ask for help and how do you plan for the future. Beyond the program being psychological, we wanted it to take a biopsychosocial spiritual lens. And what we tried to do is for each of the modules, we would have faith reflections embedded so that it's not a purely psychological program. People would also grow in their faith because of each session. We delivered this in small groups, mainly because in the Philippines, our culture is very collectivist, and there seemed to be a resilience that was coming out when people know that they're not alone. So in this case, the group format worked for us. And more importantly, it can be delivered by trained paraprofessionals, meaning not necessarily specialists. So we've trained teachers, nurses, guidance counselors to deliver this program. Of course, we wanted to make sure that it worked, and I'd like to thank, I think Father Mars is here from Xavier University, where we also pilot tested the program. Sorry, can we go back one slide? So we did a randomized control trial to see whether the program did have good outcomes, and we found that compared to those who did not receive the program, those who participated in the program improved their adaptive coping, improved their well-being. More importantly, their depression symptoms went down. Next slide, please. Before I end, I'd also like to talk about how it was important for us not just to develop the mental health and well-being internally of students, but also for them to recognize that because there's not a lot of us, it's important to help others as well. So our university's strategic plan, our Luxembourg strategic plan, has as one of its pillars universal health and well-being. And the aim of this pillar is to help increase access to health services. How do we do this? Concretely, in our department, for example, we train our students to provide mental health through service learning. Even at the undergraduate level, for example, I will bring my class to an underserved community, and we teach that community mental health literacy. Our graduate students just recently went to a refugee camp. We have some Palestinians in our refugee camps. They ran the resilience program for the refugees in that camp. And our graduate students are also encouraged to train other allied health professionals on providing mental health and well-being services. So the goal is not just to develop our students and our professionals, but also to encourage them to go out and to the community so that they may spread the word, spread the light to others. Thank you.
Okay, now number 4, please. Nita Pereira is an assistant, is professor and former head of the Department of Psychology and Counseling in St. Joseph University at Bangalore, India. Welcome, Nita, to Colombia. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute honor to be here. We've traveled about 30 hours from India, and I'm still jet-lagged. I haven't slept. So in case I miss any points, please forgive me. My time is India time, so it's been a little tough. This presentation today and the panel is really a culmination of the last 3 months. And it really, I have to, first, before I start, I'd really like to thank the Jesuits of South Asia, especially Father Joe Arun, who's the president of the South Asian Jihasa, and he's really chosen to represent well-being. In a place like India, mental health is a privilege. It is not for, the reason being that at the bottom, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, and I'm sure most of you are aware of Maslow's hierarchy, our basic needs are not met because of our population. And because of this, we look at mental health as being a privilege. Most people don't talk about mental health. Families are struggling with mental health. I would like to start off by looking at the context. So, because this is a global audience, it's important that you know the context of where we come from. Forgive me if I'm fast, because I know there's also Spanish translation. I will slow down. India holds the distinction of having the world's largest population. In fact, we have the highest number of youth in the world today globally. We have about 65% of youth who are under the age of 35, which means that it places us as educators in a very important place because it is marked by, because it is important. Adolescence is known to have brought in a lot of stress and storm, marked by intense emotional, social, and psychological changes. As you already heard before in the previous speakers also spoke about, Regina and Anna, they spoke about adolescence being such an important time of stress and storm. Young people today are really struggling in our classrooms. In our culture like ours, we have goddesses that, you know, we have Lakshmi, we have Durga, we have all of these goddesses in our country that people worship. But unfortunately, we see that patriarchy has taken a big stand, and they're deeply woven in the cultural fabric. And it often goes unquestioned, favoring boys with freedom and opportunity while silencing the voices and aspirations of girls. This contradiction is very stark. We live in a country of paradox where we have God and goddesses that are worshipped, but females are not given as much attention. Also, if you've probably heard, I think there are only 2 professions in India. One is engineering and medical. And a lot of parents push their children to take on STEM-based courses. But unfortunately, there was a study that was done by UNESCO in the year 2023. Women make up for around 43% of STEM graduates, but they represent less than 15% of STEM workforce. Social expectations, cultural norms often encourage boys to pursue science, technology, engineering, and math, while girls are subtly told to steer away from non-STEM fields. This discourages females, particularly their participation in high-demand sectors, and reinforces gender stereotypes from an early age. There's another important concept that's kind of coming in. I am sure you'll have watched Adolescence on Netflix. Manosphere, there is a concept called manosphere, and I think as educators, this becomes important for us to know. It is a trend that's slowly emerging now into the Indian context. The rise of manosphere is a network of media influencers. Think about Andrew Tate. Spaces promoting hypermasculinity, reinforcing regressive gender norms and emotional repression among young men. This kind of content spreads misogyny and affects how boys and young men think about gender roles. It glorifies control, aggression, and dominance while encouraging and discouraging emotional openness to vulnerability. This creates a generation of boys who are emotionally stunted, unable to process their feelings or engage in healthy communication. These messages can become even more powerful when they mix with certain forms of religious fundamentalism and traditional ideas of masculinity. We have men in our classrooms who talk about being real men. Now, what does that mean? It means that our male students often struggle with building meaningful relationships or seek, and they're very, very distressed. For example, on our campus, boys are more likely to laugh off anxiety and sadness and speak about it. They would rather say, I do not want to talk about mental health, because of being judged and ridiculed. The emotional fragility masked as strength leaves them isolated and unable to listen or be listened to, deepening the mental health crisis among young men. The struggle of every student in our classrooms, I'd like to talk about I'd like to talk about what is happening in our classrooms now. We see two parallel struggles unfolding. We see young women navigating deep inner dissonance as they are taught ideas of equality but pushed into gendered roles, and young men internalizing toxic masculinity and emotional repression through influences like the manosphere concept. While girls are steered away from ambition, such as being discouraged, like I spoke earlier, boys are again capable, but are taught that vulnerability is a weakness, leaving them emotionally disconnected and fragile. Together, these realities worsen the mental health crisis. Our students are entering higher education broken, confused, and vulnerable, carrying unspoken pain, cultural shame, and emotional wounds. Thereby, for us in Jesuit institutions, it's very important to look at cura personalis as a concept which calls to begin by recognizing and honoring this pain as a foundation for any true process of healing, growth, and formation. I'd like to talk about what we do with regard to this concept of cura personalis and why it's so important, especially in a place like India. At St. Joseph's University, we focus not only on intellectual excellence, but forming women and men for others, grounded in compassion, empathy, and ethics. I would like to go with Blaise Pascal's quote. He said, "The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know." This reminds us that true education must engage both the mind and the heart. In a context where young men and women often suppress their aspirations due to cultural expectations, young men are taught to hide their emotions in the name of strength. Our pedagogy seeks to create spaces of trust and care for the whole person. For example, our classrooms and departments are actively centered around creating counter-narratives. I would like to talk about this. So in our culture, we focus on obedience. So while growing up, you're supposed to listen to your parents. If they tell you something, you're supposed to do it. You cannot have your own identity. Now, along with this, what happens when you start to challenge? Young men and women are going into social media spaces. I recently attended a conference which was called Adolescence and Algorithms. Unfortunately, social media is creating content for young people that is based on things like manosphere and toxic masculinity, that is pushing our young people to look at concepts and realities that are taking away authenticity from them. So through this, it's important that in classrooms we create counter-narratives. And in fact, St. Joseph's University and our Jesuit institutions are providing those counter-narratives in the classroom. We nurture not just capable graduates, but compassionate human beings. Our alumni, for example, have entered workforces challenging these norms and fostering ethical, inclusive practices, and they are really living testaments of our vision. So for those of you, our institutions there are called Joseph's. So Josephite is a brand. They are proud, they wear these tags. You see them going around holding on to that tag as a Josephite, and that really comes from what it is that we do. In conclusion to the first part of my presentation, which are my reflections, we are nurturing and creating countercultural embodied safe spaces where students feel seen and heard. Our classrooms are not just sites of learning, but spaces of dissent. I also wanted to talk to you about this quote by Father Pedro Arrupe, which says, "Our prime educational objective must be to form men and women for others who cannot even conceive the love of God, which does not include love for the least of their neighbors." He asked us to do this, so I'm doing that. Yes, I'd like to look at, this is what happens on our campus. This is the data. If you look at, we have about 9 schools on campus, and the highest number of students seeking counseling for us are from the humanities, which is almost 50%. And this is not because students in the humanities have more mental health issues. It's because they are a lot more open to talk about issues that concern them. They are acknowledging and seeking help for emotional challenges, probably due to greater exposure to reflective and human-centered pedagogy. But the others, physical sciences, languages and literatures and business streams, may internalize stress due to cultural norms of emotional suppression. Some of them find it very hard to articulate. These findings point to the need of targeted outreach programs, especially male-dominated and performance-driven fields. This is the data of clinical and non-clinical population on our campus. We have about 68.4% that come in for non-clinical, which means that they are not diagnosable. On the other hand, we have about 31.6% of students coming in with mental health issues like depression and anxiety. I will show you in my next slide. We will look at what really are the most clinical diagnosable mental illnesses. This is an interesting, this is what happens with our youth in our country. The highest issue that we face in our campuses today is with regard to relationships and stress. Our youth have no clue how to navigate relationships. They are not taught how to talk about love. Romantic relationships are not a conversations that happens at homes because dating is bad. Dating is almost, it's wrong, it's not part of our culture. So we have students who engage in activities but don't know how to navigate these relationships, so they're depending on social media, they're depending on Instagram, then there's also pornography, and then they get addicted, so they don't have spaces to have conversations about relationships. I can tell you a case study of one of my students who came to me. He was in love with this girl, and he really, really loved her. And that relationship didn't work out. He called me one evening at about 11 p.m., and he was just at on the 12th floor. He was going to jump off. So he gave me a call and said, you know, I can't handle this. I don't know what to do because my girlfriend now is seeing my best friend. But he cannot talk to his parents about it because his parents are going to say, I told you not to do this. He can't talk to someone else about it, so what do you do? Right? So suicide is the option, or self-harm. So this is the problem. We are not having conversations at home about romantic relationships, and our youth are really struggling. They are really struggling. I can't tell you the number of sessions we've had on campus, mentoring programs on campus where we are telling them how to navigate relationships. And I'll also, in the next, I have to be mindful of time. Towards the end of the presentation, I will talk about initiatives, but we are really, our youth are really struggling. And this is why it's important to have these conversations. The next thing that is very, very predominant on our campuses is anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression is very, very high. They are students who walk around with free-floating anxiety. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know what mental illness or wellness is. They are not seeking help. They're indulging in self-harm. They're indulging in cutting themselves. They're indulging in alcohol as a coping mechanism. And the last, and there are, bullying of course is, we have a zero tolerance policy for that. But there are various addictions. We see porn addiction, drug addiction, alcohol, and things like that. Yes, most students come in for primary concerns, but then there are other concerns that kind of come up. The highest, again, being here, relationships. Our students have no clue how to navigate relationships. They are struggling, they get into relationships, and a lot of issues, again, related to that. I want to talk about the next thing, which is our interventions, which are scientific-based. There is research that suggests that evidence-based psychological interventions have proven very effective. We see two sets of students on our campuses. One set of students who have conversations with their parents. They are able to cope with stress much better. They are able to have conversations. They are able to build great interpersonal skills and relationships. But we also have students who have no clue how to navigate relationships because the base at home, the attachment with their parents is not very high. So we see, based on our counseling cases and the students we meet, students who are able to do very well in life or deal with relationships and stress are people who have good relationship with their parents. I have a case study of a student who came to me. On the first day on campus, our campus is large. We have about 11,000 students. He would come into campus and run away. He would come in the morning, he had severe social anxiety, and he would just leave. His parents then came to us, and we made sure that we slowly got him in. There was another girl whose parents were not doing very well, they're economically backward. And the parents don't know how to read and write. Now this girl had severe social anxiety. She would come into class and then she would vomit, she would throw up. And she completely avoided coming to college after that for 4 months. Her attendance was bad, parents would get messages but they did not know how to read. Now this places us in a very important position because we come from a country of also polarities. There's poverty, there's also people, so we have extremes. We have people who have a lot of money and we also have people who have no money at all. How do you navigate this? Because students who come from poor backgrounds do have other special needs, and that's an area that we really need to work at. Because as you know, India is a country that's very poor, and we do have people from various backgrounds coming in. So this is an important aspect that we touch upon on campus, but it is, interventions show that parents play an important role. Like I said, our responses are shaped by 3 very important pathways. One is Ignatian discernment, Gura Personalis and Magis. The last part of my presentation, as we need to move on quickly, is what are the initiatives that we have taken up on campus, and these initiatives have really worked. We have Samagra, which is a holistic center that we established in the year 2021. What this does is, it's rooted in 2 principles, Arivu and Nirivu. It addresses the urgent psychological needs of young people by offering workshops and group therapy. We train them on to nurture reflection, resilience, and relational well-being. In this context, students grapple with identity confusion. We organize a lot of programs for them, and they're able to cope better with stressors. The next thing that we look at is Igniters, which is a life skills training. Here we conduct sessions for students on how to navigate relationships, how to deal with stress, how to deal with romantic relationships, what is sexuality, what is gender, because these are issues that are not spoken at all. So we make sure we conduct workshops for them, which happens at the start of every academic year. It is mandatory for our students to take it up, and it's a credit-based program. So if you don't attend these programs, then you can't graduate. So it is mandatory that all of them, so we teach them skills on, like I said, on relationships and things like that. Then next slide. We have something called the Kairos program. As you all know, there is research that says that people who are grateful and who practice a lot of gratitude do well. We have a program called Kairos, which is a transformative initiative that invites students on a reflective journey rooted in gratitude and self-awareness, where they look at inner discernment. Kairos fosters emotional aspirations, clarity and purpose, aligning with Ignatian call to find God in all things. We have these programs where they come for workshops and they are grateful. We do a program where they have to talk about what they're grateful about, and it's really worked. The last one, which is again based on social justice and Ignatian spirit of spirituality and social action, we invite students here to step beyond themselves in service of others while nurturing their own emotional and spiritual growth. So at Bembala, we have students each semester going out and doing community service. I can tell you this is a very effective program, especially for students who come from very elite backgrounds. They are very pampered. So to show them social reality of what really happens has really helped. Like we had, I was a mentor for a class, and these students were the cream. When I say the cream, I mean that they came from very elite backgrounds. We took them to a village, and we exposed them to social reality, and they were known to be very rebellious. The villagers there, the people from the village, when they saw them, they said, this is the best group of people we've had. They helped them, they cleaned the entire place, they stayed with them, they cooked with them, and that experience for these students was very fulfilling. So it's important, and this is a priority for us to expose our students to some form of social justice. Otherwise, they live in this bubble of their own social reality, which may not be true. The last one is we also have departments where we look at group therapy. I belong to the Department of Psychology. We have peer support programs where all of us are involved in having groups and offering peer support programs. I would like to conclude by quoting William Butler Yeats: "Education is not the filling of a pail, but lighting of a fire." Our educational mission continues to light the fire of transformation, where every young person, irrespective of gender, sexuality, or social status, be empowered to live with meaning, serve with love, and contribute to a world that reflects the value of social justice, reconciliation, and peace. Thank you.
Los micrófonos, por favor. Bueno, por favor, Okay, we are going to begin the panel with some questions. And I would like to go a little bit more in deep and maybe to share some experiences and barriers to implement all the activities that you were telling about. So, Anna, if you want to tell us one experience and some barriers that you have to implement all the things you are doing over there.
Hello, hola. Okay, here we go. So a barrier, I'll mention a barrier with which we're all familiar. We're in so many silos on campus, and there's such a lack of trust between different units on campus that I think we need to rebuild trust within our campuses. So student life and campus ministry and faculty and staff. Staff is a forgotten category on our campuses. And I think initiatives with faculty and staff together, just sort of breaking down these silos that are unnecessary and unhelpful, will help us be much more effective.
Okay, Anna, I will turn to Regina. The same question. Over there in Philippines, which barriers do you face?
For us, it's access to mental health services because of the lack of professionals. It's also lack of access because of the cost of mental health services, because it's not funded by the government necessarily, so people have to pay a lot to access mental health services.
And in your case, Nita, which barriers do you have over there in Bangalore, in your university, to access to all these type of things you exposed?
Sorry, Carlos, could you repeat the question?
The type of barriers do you have over there to implement all the programs did you explain us?
The barriers to mental health? We have a lot of barriers to mental health because, like I said, mental health is not a priority at all in our country. We don't look at mental health as a problem. Most people say, for example, if a young adult had to meet a parent and say, I'm upset or depressed, the question is, but I also have depression, you have to deal with it. Everyone has depression, everyone has anxiety. How do you think I coped with it, right? So the idea of depression, the idea of mental health, the idea of mental well-being is a very, very new concept, and it's only emerged post-COVID. Before that, it's really a privilege because therapy is expensive in India. If you look at the statistics and the number of counselors to mental issues, it's very, very poor, and so therefore it is a privilege, and I'm glad that we have spaces like this and our institutions that are emphasizing on mental health, but there are many barriers.
Okay, and for Regina, now, which recommendations will you give to the dean or the president of the university around the crisis of loneliness? What can they think about that and how they can do something around that?
So first of all, can I just thank the president of our university, Father Bobby Yap, not just for bringing me here, but also because of the support that the university has given. The fact that mental health and well-being is in our strategic plan, for me, is such a big boost because there is a recognition of how important health is. So I guess I'm going to start with that. The recognition of its importance as a university and setting directions and resources for that, I think that's important. We can't just say it's important and not put resources or people or support. So that's one. The second is, we were talking earlier this morning about creative solutions, right? And Anna was talking about how people are lonely despite being so connected in social media. And there are ways. For example, I think I talked about the speed friending program of our guidance. I mean, who would have thought about having mechanisms for people to meet? You make it an assumption that people will meet, people will make friends, and yet we are finding out that it is a problem. But I think one of the things that we need to do, and it's really part of the Ignatian principle, is the issue of getting our students themselves to tell us what they need and what the solutions are. Many of the solutions of our guidance office, for example, did not emanate from the counselors. It emanated from the students as well. So getting the students to engage and participate and tell us what kinds of programs are important to them. I think loneliness is not just not having a friend, it's not being heard.
Okay, thank you. Anna, about loneliness, what do you think and what will you recommend? I see an interview that you give around that, and it was very interesting. You can share a little bit your advice.
I have no idea what interview that was, but I'll just wing it. I just want to underline something that Regina just said about listening. Bernard Lonergan, one of the Jesuit giants of the last century, taught us that teaching starts with listening, deep, deep listening. And I think with all of the challenges that we are facing in our universities, the very best place to start is to listen really acutely and carefully and slowly to the students that we serve.
Dr. Nita, can you tell us a little bit more about the connections you built in Bembala? How
Yes.
it works?
So Bembala, like I mentioned, is our outreach program. What happens is we have a small unit on campus, which is Bembala, but it is not only for St. Joseph's University. It is part of a Bangalore Jesuit Educational Society. So what they do is that we tie up with many villages around. We have our centers around the state. We have Manvi, we have Belgaum, and we have all of these places. We tie up with them. Our students have to visit these spaces and do work with social concern. They have to go live there with the villagers, and they have to see their life and work with them. This brings in this concept of gratitude for the privilege that they experience. Earlier today, Father General was talking about psychology and how psychology is not just therapy, right? It is not just psychological interventions. It is these small initiatives that we create on campus for them to be grateful. For example, if someone's depressed, you want to look at, especially in a country like ours, where we have such stark polarities, you want to look at the privilege you have, and you want to thank, you want to be grateful. So Bembala has a lot of connections around, and we also have a lot of corporate sponsorships that come in. Our students work with children. They go around doing also awareness campaigns on traffic signals. So they are out there, and social justice is the center of the outreach program.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Anna, I have been reading your excellent book. I enjoyed that a lot. The Jove adult playbook, Living Like It Matters. Can you give us a brief report of the main points of the book?
Sure, thank you. So over the years, I've become growingly concerned about my students. At Villanova, thanks to basketball, it's been harder and harder to get into our university. So while the academic talent and prowess and organizational skills and study skills of our students have been getting better and better over the years, their ability to to cross the threshold into a flourishing adulthood has been getting worse and worse. So my concern has grown for them. My co-author and I wrote a book it's filled with the hope, the kind of hope that Father General spoke about this morning. That's not a false hope, but a hope based in the possibilities of what young people can become. It has 3 sections, which are the 3, I think, building blocks of a flourishing adult life: work, leisure, and relationships. And the book is threaded throughout with stories of young people, because it would be not very convincing to listen to a middle-aged voice if you're 18 to 22. So the book is threaded through with young voices of students who have faced challenges and met those challenges, and journal exercises, etc. And the point of the book is to help students rehabilitate their imaginations, give them a renewed vocabulary, and give them renewed strategies to help them cross that threshold into a flourishing adulthood.
Okay, thank you. Regina, how can we align all welfare efforts that we are doing inside the university? Because we have a lot of efforts going on in all the universities. How will you align them, and how will you think them among the Jesuit universities to make like a network of all these efforts that we are doing?
So I believe that interventions need to be contextually and culturally nuanced, because our universities have different contexts. What works in one might not necessarily work in another. Having said that, first, I believe in the power of data and needs analysis. For example, our resilience program, we did not create that without first doing some kind of needs analysis in terms of where our students were at and what kind of coping they were doing and what their needs are. So the power of data, I think, is important. And that's something that can be done across universities. I think sharing good practices and some strategies across universities, even materials and resources, might also help, especially now that our students are quite global. Digital resources, for example, can be shared across IAJU members. But again, I will always go back to, we can't just copy and paste. I think they need to still be nuanced or even customized depending on the context and the culture.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Nita, if you're going to recommend to your president in the university one of all the activities you make, which one will you choose and why? I know a lot, but thinking in the students, which one do you think is most important among them?
I think we need to start having conversations on campus around sexuality, gender, romantic relationships, navigating life skills. We are a culture that does not talk. We believe in authority and discipline. Even for me, while growing up, right? I mean, my parents were a little more open to conversations, but most young kids today have no place to have conversations. So we need to have start counter narratives on campus and have conversations about this. I can't tell you the number of young people who are sexually active, but they have no clue what to do. They have STDs. The young girls who are getting pregnant, but there is no culture of conversation. So we need to have conversations about gender and sexuality, especially in this age group. And post-COVID, things have gotten a lot more worse because everyone has a smartphone. Like I said, we are a country of polarities. There was a recent study that was done, and 92% of people in India have access to mobile phones, but have no clue the content that they are consuming. So you consume content, we cannot speak. So where are conversations happening? So one thing that I would really recommend is to create spaces on campus where we can have a culture of conversations, allow students to speak freely about whatever it is that they want to speak about, and our departments are doing that. For example, the Department of English, the Department of Psychology, Humanities provide spaces, but we need to speak. We need to have transparent conversations and not hide things under the carpet. So that's something that I would recommend.
Dr. Anna, how will you introduce the new vocabulary? It's a new vocabulary, but you explain for the students. How do you introduce all this type of vocabulary to them and to the new teachers and professors?
So I think it's not a new vocabulary. It's a tried and true Ignatian vocabulary that needs to be drawn upon in a needs to be sung from the mountaintops in this cultural context that we live in today. So while it's not new, I think it has new purchase on our young students' lives. And how to do it, I mean, all of us are doing it, right? So you all have examples of doing it. I think it's really important to do it person to person, interpersonally. As challenging as that is, as some of our universities are very large. And I don't know yet how to crack that nut, because I think the interpersonal is at the center.
Okay, and we have only 10 minutes left, so if somebody in the audience who want to have a question, please raise your hand and we will take the microphones. The microphones are over there. Somebody? Over there, please. 1, 2, 3. Over there. Allá, por favor. Y acá. First, please.
I would like to thank all the speakers for very interesting presentations. I enjoyed very much. I didn't enjoy the information you gave us. I thought it was very alarming. So my question actually is towards Nita. You talked about the manosphere. That is something that really worries me, and you might ask yourself, whether that has something to do with democracy. And it actually does, because research is showing, at least for the global north or the Western democracies, that there is a strong correlation between the manosphere sites and extremism. And I was wondering whether you know, or maybe even across the board, to all the speakers, whether there is this kind of correlation between people that get drawn, young men that get drawn into the manosphere in their support for extremist political causes. I'm really interested in this topic. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a very deep, reflective question. And I think there is a high correlation between this, because what's happening with men in classrooms, for example, right? They are looking at this sense of entitlement that is coming in, and they're going out feeling very entitled. And these men enter workforces, they enter politics, and this is not just from a political context, right? Your question is from a political context, but you can look at every workspace now. You can look at education, we can look at corporates, we can look at the medical profession. These men go out to be extremely entitled, and there is almost this hate towards women. And this deep-rooted misogyny that is coming in, which can have so much impact on, so for example, with democracy, when you talk about politics and democracy, these are big roles. These are places where people are making decisions and policy level decisions, to have men who are not empathetic towards female issues can be extremely, it can be a problem. Like, I can give you a simple example, right? If you look at women in workforces, women have their own issues with pregnancy, with childbirth, with breastfeeding. To have men with a mindset of manosphere, they are going to make policies, they're going to make decisions that are not going to come from a place of empathy. It's going to come from a place of hating women, and that's a big problem today. So therefore, this needs to be looked at from a gender lens, and it's important as, and I'm sure this is not just an Indian, manosphere is not an Indian concept, though it's slowly creeping in now. I know it's a global concept, right? So I feel like there is empathy that's required, and for us, all of us here in this space, I think we have a big role to play, because we do not want men to go out into spaces having huge egos and making those decisions, especially at policy, right, at the space of policy. We need empathetic leaders who are kind, who come to decisions from a space of kindness, from a space of empathy, and from a space of logical, critical thinking. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay, here, please. Can you?
Yes, thank you all for your presentations. I am just curious about your thoughts on how much of the student mental unwellness is driven by the amount of time that each of us spends on our devices, either with our, headphones on or just looking at social media, flipping through TikTok. I know that has a big impact, but I'm just wondering, what's the way forward, and how do we pull ourselves and our students away from our devices?
Dr. Anna, please.
That's like the question. I've raised 4 children, and it's been the biggest failure of my parenting generation, is how to deal with that exact question. In giving a presentation to students, I use this poll everywhere slides, in which I ask them to vote on how many hours a day they had spent in the last day or something. I had them pull out their phones. And the naive Anna put like 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 to 3 hours. And after the talk, one student came out to me and said, Dr. Moreland, I think you need to know that yesterday I spent 11 hours online. I was like, what? So it is jaw-dropping, and I don't know what to do. I mean, look, I have a phone hotel in my classroom, and my students call it a phone jail. The problem is that now, they have to basically like disrobe to get into a non-technological space with the technology is wrapped around with the Apple Watch, with everything. It's a huge challenge, and I don't know the way forward.
Can I just respond to that? Beyond just how much time is spent on these technologies, which is correlated with mental health issues, it's how early students are exposed. I think that's problematic. There are studies that show that when students are exposed too early, there are issues of depression and anxiety, because your identity is now tied to all these influencers and beautiful lives that you see that you cannot compare to. And so one of the things that I do whenever I have the chance to give parenting talks is to tell the parents, please don't give your kids phones too early. And don't make your phones or gadgets babysitters, because one, they don't learn how to sit in silence. They don't learn to just think about what I'm going through, because it's so easy to just grab a phone and distract yourself and not think.
In the last days, I saw one woman, 22 years, and her problem was that she was very afraid because she's going to have the first date in person, because the other days she has met was with WhatsApp or something like that. So it is really a huge problem. And I think that the persons have to realize that it is not as good. It is like the electronic cigarette that we know all day now that it is not good. And it is doing a lot of problems now. They might think it like that. Some schools here in Colombia, they have think that it is not good for the children to have their devices over there in the school, and they are not allowed to take them to the school. I think that is one option, to think it really different than the way it is now done. Mm-hmm. Somebody else? We have one last question over there, please.
Thank you for the presentation. There have been participants from, people from different types of economical, positions. So there are developed countries and developing, that is growing countries. How does the economy of developing country or a growing country, this, obsession with economic success, correlate with psychological illnesses that, the people face, especially the students, budding citizens? What is the relationship between the obsession with economic success and psychological illnesses?
Regina.
So one, there is a link between poverty and mental health, because there's an entire cycle, right? If a child grows up in an impoverished family, they probably will not get good nutrition. And we know that nutrition builds the brain. Once the brain development is hampered, then that sets you up for handicapping your mental health. So definitely, there is a disadvantage for people who are growing up in developing economies because of just that basic need, the physical body not being developed enough. But at the other end is the lack of access to health. For example, I think Nita and I both talked about how expensive it is. And it seems like getting mental health services is only for those who can afford or the privileged. So what do you do if you cannot afford? And so there's a lot of crisis for those who do not have access to mental health.
Okay, I invite the panelists to stand up here, please, and take a photograph group, a photo group, and then